Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to our 180th Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. It is a great pleasure to have Vincenzo Alfano, who is presenting not for the first time in this series, and it's great to have such great supporters of the series as Vincenzo. Today he's going to be presenting on, where's his title? There it is, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the twofold effect of economic inequality on football. Just before Vincenzo starts, to say that, of course, we are generously sponsored by both the University of Reading and Sports Economics Review, the most recent addition to the pantheon of sports economics journals. So do consider the Sports Economics Review for any of your sports economics research. As you'll have seen in the reminder, potentially, and if you don't get the reminders, do let me know and I can add you to the team. The reminder has all the forthcoming talks. We've got talks lined up all the way until Christmas. And in that lineup, I've also included information about conferences. So there are various conferences taking place, mainly moving into 2025, as I've mentioned before, and you'll soon see a poster to advertise a conference taking place at the pictured location behind me. I'm not really there, as you can probably imagine. It's not quite like that in terms of weather-wise at this time of the year, but if you're interested, we're going to have a conference on football finance, governance, and analytics in mid-February. More details to come. And there will be a variant of the European Sports Economics Tour in the spring of 2025, which will likely involve the usual Gijón conference, as well as Duisburg Football and Finance Conference, and also an additional conference that you may have seen an email from the European Sports Economics Association about, in France, a conference on active territory, sport and leisure in Pau in France. That's all from me. Vincenzo, I'm looking forward to your talk. Please do take away your presentation.
Thank you very much once again. It's always a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for all the patience you have with me. I really look forward to your comments, because each time it's very, very useful to present here, because I always get great constructive criticism. Can you see my presentation?
Yep.
Perfect. So today I will present you the good, the bad, and the ugly, a work I am doing about the twofold effect of economic inequality on football. So what's the basic idea that motivates this work? Well, as we all know, in the last decades, there have been a lot of scholars studying the relationship between economic factor and, in general, the quality of sports outcome. More specifically,
just to interrupt you, Vincenzo, we're still seeing your title slide. Is that right?
No, it's not.
I don't know if the presentation is in a different screen somehow.
It's just a PDF.
Might be if you go into presentation mode and then reshare, that might work.
You mean in presentation mode before sharing?
Perhaps, yeah.
Let's see if it works. Sorry.
That's okay. Teams always gives us these kinds of issues.
Can you see the table of contents now?
Table of contents.
And now the introduction, right?
Yeah, perfect. So thanks, Vincenzo.
Thank you so much for spotting this before I reach the end of the presentation. You are still on the title. So as I was saying, there has been a lot of research about the impact that economic factor has on the quality of, in general, sportive outcomes, and in particular of national football teams. Very often, the mechanism used to explain this relationship has been that there are financial investment that enhance national sport outcomes. So this is just a selection of some more or less recent paper that studied the issue from this perspective. The basic idea is the richer you are, the more you invest, the better the sportive outcomes are. Now, the idea that motivates this work is that there is something more. There are some mechanisms that have been overlooked by previous study, and that we should also look at the interaction of some key variables that have been studied in the past, and not just at their levels. What I mean is that some of these variables, such as economic inequality and GDP, so economic welfare, may have different effects in different contexts. Previous literature mostly focus on the level of this variable, also including in their model, of course, demographic, meteorological, geographical, and institutional effect. And I mean football and more in general sportive institution effect on this. But to the best of my knowledge, there has been no work focusing specifically on the interaction between inequality and welfare on a country to explain sportive success in football. So a recent paper that employs a very interesting model is the one of Gasquez and Royela that includes all the variables that we discussed so far. What we do is basically taking their model and testing it in what we believe it's the largest to the date dataset in which this relationship has been studied. Looking at the interaction between GDP level and Gini poverty index to trying to figure out if there is a different effect of welfare and inequality according to the level of such variables in the country. Why we think this is relevant? Well, because from a purely theoretical standpoint, there are two different effects of economic disparity on the football outcome, and these effects have different signs. So on one end, following the recent work of One et al., we might believe that countries with low inequality can promote football participation of the poorer people. In this respect, there are no limited opportunity in these countries for the poor to play football, and hence the talent pool from which a nation, a country can get their national representative, it's better. So in the word of Landreth, there is a sport for all policy because there is low inequality. This, of course, can enhance the quality of national football teams because there are no poor people left behind. On the other hand, if we look at who won FIFA World Cup, we see that there are a lot of very unequal countries. The last 10 winners of the cup are countries very different in terms of welfare, so in terms of GDP per capita, but mostly very unequal country. This is, of course, just anecdotal evidence, but if we look at the last 10 winners, we have Argentina, Brazil, Italy, and Spain, countries with very high level of economic inequality. Also, Germany, while it's less unequal than the previous country, as we all know, has a very strong dual nature between its former eastern and western parts. So they have some degree of economic dualism. France is even more equal than Germany, but while we look at the national representative, we do not have to forget that many French players are actually people that were born in former French colonies. So if we look at the pool talent from which the player of the national team of France is composed, there is a lot of inequality because from one end we have a Western country such as France, and from the other we have a lot of African states in which, of course, the level of GDP are much lower than the French ones. So these players that, of course, nowadays have been naturalized as French citizens were born in much poorer country. If we consider the whole as a single country, the level of inequality, it's very, very high. And notice that these arguments may be true at some extent also for Argentina, that has in Spain and through the Schengen passport that most Argentinians can easily get through Italy, a country which is much richer than their own. So if we consider them as a joint country from which the talent pool can select players, then once again, the dualism, it's the economic inequality, it's much higher. And also, to some extent, given the difference between La Liga in Spain and Primera Liga in Portugal, also between Brazil and Portugal. Also, still anecdotically, but notice that also when we look at not just the last 10 winners, but the country with the most victories in the history of the FIFA World Cup, we have countries once again from the same set. Brazil, Germany, which in some edition was just West Germany, and Italy. So it seems that for some reason, economic inequality favors football success. Why? Well, a possible explanation that is found in the literature is that this is a qualitative paper. It has no quantitative approach, but they tell that a lot of strong Brazilian talents come from the favelas, from poor country. And also that in the whole sub-Saharan Africa, football, it's a way to escape their country for the poorer part of the population. So poverty, in a way, may be an element that favors football careers. Why? Because if you live in a poor country and you are young, you do not have many incentives to find a regular career. Also because it's possible that do not exist a likely good outcome that you manage to have a satisfactory, normal, regular career. So making the investment that you need to make in your youth to become or to attempt to become a professional player, it's much less costly in terms of opportunity cost if you live in a poorer country rather than if you live in a richer country where renouncing to proper education or to starting a career, you may pay this choice in your 30 or 40. In other terms, if you live in a richer country, renouncing to study or to work to devote yourself completely to a sport, which is needed if you want to become a professional athlete in a competitive sport such as football is, has a very high opportunity cost. So this is a very risky decision, and there is a very interesting paper by Smith et al. That supports the idea that this risk is very well perceived by youngsters in Germany. On the other hand, of course, as we were saying, if you live in a very poor country, these opportunity costs are much lower, just because you do not have very good opportunities in having a satisfactory common career outside sport. Of course, the other side of the medal is that if you live in a low-income country, you have drawbacks to become a professional player. You are likely to do not have the opportunity to use infrastructures that are very much needed to become a professional athlete. And more importantly, you probably do not have the possibility to find the other incentive that supports professional sport players, such as training system, television broadcasting, and more in general, professional figures that can help transforming a raw talent into a football athlete, more in general, into a professional athlete. In more general terms, as we all know, sport is a form of leisure. And so poor country often may not afford all the economy needed in order to have this form of leisure thrive. So if we draw the sum, if we summarize all these arguments, we may see that both economical inequality and welfare might play a role in fostering football's career. And so let young talent to arrive to football success. So it may be the case that it's not just the inequality that improves result, but the inequality over a certain threshold of welfare. So that there is a positive effect of inequality on football quality in countries that are above a certain threshold of welfare, a certain threshold of GDP per capita. Why? Because this country might at the same time benefit of youngsters with low opportunity cost in attempting a sportive career, and of the infrastructure in the richer part of the country to get these raw talents to express all their potential and to grow. So, might be the case that the good, so the football success of a country, can be the result of an interaction between low income levels, so the bad, and the ugly, so the economic inequality. And this explains the fancy title, which we should discuss as well later. So, what do? We try to test this idea, this mechanism, through an empirical analysis using feasible generalized least square on a very big data set, which is composed by 152 countries observed monthly from 1975 to 2022. The dataset is composed according to the availability of data, and missing value within the time span were obtained using linear interpolation, so to avoid having an unbalanced dataset. To the best of our knowledge, this should be the largest dataset in terms of number of country and of time in which this relationship has been tested. We proxy football success using the ELO rating of national teams. So I go fast here because we have an expert about ELO rating that is going to present us soon. But basically, unlike some other way to do it, we do not have different starting ELO points. So we give 1,500 points to each team at the beginning of the story, and then we update after each match the ELO, considering a weight that is the importance of the game, the goal difference, and the difference between the predicted and the actual, and the predicted outcome. So I go fast on this if you have question. So this is the way to proxy the football success. Of course, this is updated after each match, but not all the teams plays with the same frequencies. So also this ELO is interpolated, having a new ELO each month, which of course is the linear interpolation between the games. So if the team played each month, the ELO is the real one updated. Otherwise, it's a linear interpolation to go from the two standing ELO points. This proxy of football success is expressed as a function of economic condition, demographics, meteorological characteristic of the country, football institution, and geographical determinants. So, more precisely, the independent variable at the right-hand side of the equation are the natural logarithm of the male population. Ideally, we should have the male population in the age of being able to play sport, but unfortunately, we weren't able to find this data. Temperature, which is the average yearly temperature computed between 1991 and 2020. And following Hoffman et al., we compute this as the average temperature minus 14 squared, because their assumption is that the optimal annual temperature for sport is 14 degrees Celsius. The number of years elapsed since the first official game played by the national representative, which is a way to proxy football institutions, so how old the football tradition is in the country, and then some fixed effect for the confederation through which the national team belongs to control for geographical aspects, and the two variables of most interest for this work, which are the Gini index, as you know, a simple index of inequality according to how concentrated the income are in the country, and the gross domestic product per capita. The dataset controls for almost 50 years, and we have monthly observations, which of course have been interpolated to keep data. We need to do some transformation, because in this time, as you all know, there are some countries that were born mostly because of the collapse of Yugoslavia and the Soviet Unions, and then the Great Britain is often the only statistical unit, while FIFA recognizes different teams within Great Britain. So we had to take England following Hoffman et al., because of course we cannot have the Gini index of Northern Ireland or Wales. And then there is the question of the lag, of course, because as you have seen in the main equation expressing the relationship between the variable, there is a lag because there is an effect of the welfare of the Gini and of the population, which comes years later, the effect. Now, so usually in this kind of model, the independent variable are lagged, usually by 1t, which is 1 year in these works. This, of course, helps with reverse causality problem, so finding a causal next to the analysis. We used a more complete lag structure, because unlike previous works that have a yearly dataset mostly, having a monthly dataset, we thought it would be interesting to see if the result hold for different lag structures. And so we estimated it using 1, 5, 10, 15, and 20 lags. In this way, we include different number of seasons, avoiding having a seasonal effect to introduce a bias in this analysis. And so we estimate this equation with feasible generalized least square. If we estimate it without the interaction effect, we mostly find the same results previously highlighted by the literature, that express that there is a positive role on the quality of football exerted by the institution, so the length of football tradition in the country, and by the gross domestic product, so the investment. The more a country is rich, the more it can invest in leisure, the better the team is. When we re-estimate it using introducing an interaction term between the Gini index and the gross domestic product per capita, we see that the relationship is not so linear. So it depends on the level of the GDP per capita. The effect of inequality on the quality of football national representative depends on the level of GDP per capita. And so these findings, in a way, are consistent with the hypothesis that income inequality can have a positive impact on football success, because this effect depends on the national level of economic development. So I show you now the marginal effect, because as you know, when you do the interaction, it doesn't make any sense to look at the coefficients, but you should just look at the marginal effect that here are plotted with robust standard level. So wait, here we see what happens for a marginal increase of Gini at the ELO rating, so at the football quality of the team, at different level of GDP per capita. The red horizontal line is the 0. So basically, if the estimation touch with this confidence interval, the red line, it means that there is no effect. As you may see, the estimation of this equation suggests that over a threshold which is of around $22,000 of GDP per capita, inequality, an increase in inequality increases the quality of the football team, proxied by ELO ratings. Here we have this estimation using just one lag of the independent variable, but as you may see, using 5, 10, 15, or 20 lags, the effect still holds. Of course, it changed the level at which it becomes statistically significant, so the interval doesn't touch 0, but it changed in a reasonable span that goes from the 22 to the 24 of 20 lakhs. So it goes from $22,000 of GDP per capita to $24,000 of GDP per capita. The average effect is of around 6 points of ELO rating in the monthly estimate. So in short, these empirical findings are coherent with a theoretical perspective that suggests that wealthier nations have low-income individuals that, having lower opportunity cost in pursuing a sport career, can try more easily to do it, expanding the talent pool of the country and so increasing the potential for football success. At the same time, the wealthier sentiment of this unequal society can provide the resources to transform raw talent into sport champions and nurture and develop these talents. On the other hand, if you live in a country with a lower GDP per capita, this positive relationship between income inequality and football success is not observed. You fall into the 0 line. The confidence interval overlaps with the 0. There is no effect. Why? Well, likely because the lack of resources and infrastructure in this poorer nation do not give any of the potential benefits that income inequality could give in richer countries. So economic poverty in that case diminishes or nullifies below a certain threshold the positive influence of inequality on the quality of the football team. Our estimate, of course, have to be taken cum grano salis, so with a grain of salt, because they are dependent on a number of assumptions and of a number of data that we did. More importantly, the dataset is not the result of a sampling operation, but mostly the results of availability of data, and so external validity has to be considered very carefully. But just to discuss the results of this estimation, one extra Gini point, so one extra point of inequality, led on average to 5 more ELO points for the national team if the GDP is of about $22,000, which is the minimum necessary to observe an effect. In wealthier nations, the effect is stronger. So it goes to 10 ELO points for any extra point in the Gini poverty index when the GDP per capita is of about 40,000 euro. Sorry, $40,000, which is roughly a country such as Italy. These numbers do not change so much when we increase the time lag of the independent variables on the right-hand side of the equation to 5, 10, 15, and even 20 months, suggesting that there is some robustness in this empirical finding. Concluding, this analysis using a feasible generalized least square estimator on a dataset covering 152 countries observed monthly from 1975 to 2022 found a relationship between economic inequality, economic welfare, and the national football team performance. The analysis supports our theoretical hypothesis according to which income inequality has a positive effect on football success, but this effect is contingent on a country level of economic development. So income inequality can significantly positively impact football success, but this effect depends on the level of economic development and is estimated for country with a GDP per capita of above $22,000 to 1 ELO point. These, once again, are in line with an explanation that suggests that in poorer countries, the opportunity cost to invest all yourself as a youngest in a sportive career is lower than in richer countries. And of course, that at the same time, you need a certain level of economic welfare to have the infrastructure and the organization and the people that can invest to transform raw talent into professional, successful players. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your comments and critiques because we need to improve this work.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo. I'm going to give you a team's round of applause. That was a really interesting talk. As someone who's done a little bit of work on kinds of international football differences and broader macroeconomic and other variables, it's really interesting to see this kind of work. And it suggested maybe Margaret Thatcher helped England to do better at football. They have a 20-year lag, and maybe the lag's a bit longer, and maybe that can help explain why England has become more successful in recent years, a long lag. Questions that folk have got with their hands up? Steve has got his hand immediately up, so I'll hand over to Steve. Sorry, I muted you, Steve. So
yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Vincenzo. Before we get into the economic analysis of the math and everything, I have an American hypothesis to suggest to you to also consider. I don't think it matters in this paper, but perhaps for further work here is another variable. And the hypothesis is first that you correctly, I think, demonstrate that without a certain level of wealth, you will not have professional clubs who have enough money to invest in the quality of training than that you would elsewhere. So one explanation for the success of Argentina as opposed to Kyrgyzstan is that the Argentine top league is wealthy enough that it can find and develop players that the Kyrgyzstan top league can't develop. As we get wealthier, then you have a situation where professional clubs, and I'm using American baseball as an example of that because this is clearly the case here, have decided that they can get an appropriate level of talent for their club competition by using players who are either developed privately by wealthy parents or acquired from poor countries like Mexico or Korea or Japan, which is not as wealthy as the United States. And therefore, the structures in the United States that would give clubs, they adopt restraints, which would affirmatively limit the ability of private clubs to have the incentive to invest in their own players. This is why, for example, in American baseball, we have no local academies. So one thing to think about there is to look more on the rich countries and to examine where they're getting their players and to look at whether that level of the investment in player talent at the higher level is such that it is sufficient. The reality is that Manchester United makes parochial self-interested decision as to using the Williamson formula, make or buy players. And they do not seriously consider the success of the England national team in making that decision. And so you could get into that situation. Relatedly to that, then, and then I'll stop, is to see if you could explore whether the countries that seem to be doing well are more committed through their national federations to providing more opportunities for poor kids. They have the resources, so they're in the middle. They're wealthy enough that they have the resources to support poor kids, but they're more committed to it. Whereas the wealthiest countries, and again, I'm thinking the United States as an example, there is no national policy to try to make sports available for poor kids. So I just sort of throw those two things out for you to consider.
Yes, I thank you for that. I agree with most of you say. I don't know if you really expect a reply because it's true. I mean, I agree with what you say. From the perspective of this research, your criticism is exactly why we use national teams, because with clubs it's so much more complex because they can get talents globally. So think of Saudi Arabia League, that in a matter of years attracted very, very top players just because they pay salaries that most of the rest of the world can't. It's much harder to do it on a national basis, of course, because you need more years, even though they did very well in 2022 against Argentina, but this is another story. It's much harder. From what you were saying, which it's tangent to this work, it's not exactly the focus of this research, I think. I agree with what you say about poor young talents, but the huge problem that answering to your research question in a quantitative way would be to define what a poor is. My ex-wife is from Argentina, and she always told me when we were in Italy that I have no idea what a poor is, because poor people in Italy live a much better life than poor people in Argentina. There is and this is very true globally. Argentina is not even in the worst part of the poor world. So the thing is, if the US Federation helps poor people, it's not the same thing if the Argentina Federation helps poor people. And so when you do it empirically, it's very hard to discriminate between that, I think. But it's very interesting. If there was a way to better define poverty in an absolute way, it would be great. I don't know if I answered to your thing, but thank you for the comments. They were very...
Thanks, Steve. Jorge has his hand up.
Hello. Yeah, it works. I love these papers, this type of papers of trying to figure out with these important questions with big measures. My first question is, what is the correlation between Gini and GDP? That would be, just a simple question. But, I have some comments. For your motivation, you kind of try to put in the same basket Brazil, Argentina, Italy, and Spain. And that is nice, of you to trying to tell us in South America that we look like Europeans, but we do not. Brazil is, as you said, your wife, Brazil is top 5, if not the worst country in terms of inequality in the world. I think maybe Colombia we're just above Brazil. That they're not, in terms of the motivation, it's not, I don't find it, I like your exercise, but it's not credible trying to convince us that, because you have some immigrants or son of immigrants, and then you are as unequal as in Brazil, which is much more unequal than Argentina. So yeah, I would, I would adjust that a bit. And then another point, and especially we have these Nobel Prizes this year of working on institutions, and you have this institution variable measured as the date of the number of years since the first game, but your data set starts in 1975. So essentially, except for some, split countries in Europe and stuff, but everyone played their first game before 1975. Even in, Yugoslavia got split at some point. So you're going to say, yeah, Croatia played, first game in 93 or something, but then Serbia takes for Yugoslavia. So they did play before. So I would use as institution the number of divisions in each country's football league. So, for instance, a country with a poor institution like Colombia, we only have 2 divisions. A country with a good institution in football, it's England. I don't know how many have, 8 or 9 or whatever, but that is the same case as Argentina. And then you would actually kind of pick up the fact, yeah, Argentina is probably GDP is not very rich as England, but institution-wise in football, I wouldn't say that they are that different, because it's not the association who's trying to figure out who plays football. It's the clubs in this country. So they have all these, Spain, also Italy, I guess, I don't know very well Italy, but I'm pretty sure you have a lot of divisions. So I think that would be a nicer measure of institutions, and it would probably vary more than the one you actually have. And with more time, it would tell a bit more. Maybe, if you want to interpret the coefficient, then you might have to worry about the endogeneity. But, if you don't worry about, you just want to control, then maybe it's enough. Or maybe you want to pursue further and start speaking about the importance of institutions in football. Thank you.
So, coming to your point, it's the number of years elapsed since the first game. So it doesn't matter if we start looking at the data in 1975. England, that I think played its first game in 1898. In 1975, as a 77 as its institutional proxy. It's not the variable doesn't start to count in 1975. It does start to count where you played your first match. So you have a difference. And exactly for what you said, for countries that split it up, we used the original institution. So Serbia, Croatia, it's exactly what you did. We used the Yugoslavia first match because, of course, you inherit institution in a way. Yes, we can try to see what happens using your alternative operationalization. I have no idea. We should gather the data. I am just a bit worried that most countries would have the same number of division, and so it would not be so effective in discriminate that, but we can try. Thank you for the suggestion. Of course, it's a good thing. For your first comment, I am not so sure about what the critic is, because, if we assume that Gini measure inequality, by the way, in our dataset, the relationship between GDP and Gini is of about minus 0.4 in the data. So yearly for all the countries in the dataset. So it's not that much strongly correlated. The point is, I want country very different into a data set to test a relationship. So I don't really see the critique that the countries are very different in terms of inequality. Yes, this is exactly what we want to increase the statistical power. You want country with very different level of GDP and of inequality, so that you may test the relationship at different points. If you have very similar countries in terms of inequality and of GDP, then your estimation is not going to be very good, because your data are not very diverse. So I am not sure. I mean, if your critic is that the Gini index is not a good proxy of inequality, then you are right. Of course, there is a huge literature as the GDP is not a good proxy of welfare. No, we all know that they have a lot of problems, but still, those are, to the best of my knowledge, mainstream operationalization. So these concepts, and of course, we could use alternative ones and see what happens. But I really don't get why it's a problem that you have very diverse country in the data in terms of inequality and GDP, because I think this is exactly what you want to test a relationship. You want very different data points to have a good. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm telling you.
Yeah, I wasn't saying anything about using Gini and GDP. I just wanted to know the correlation because they could be highly correlated. 0.4 is good.
Yeah.
That's...
Thank you, Jorge. Do we have any more questions and comments? Alex.
Hi, thank you for, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for a very nice presentation. So you use their linear value of GDP, right? GDP per capita. Like you don't, because usually in the literature we use a different functional form. We use natural log of GDP. And in that regard, I was wondering whether a different functional form would change the result. Did you try it?
So I did not try the logarithm. I can test it, but then I guess that it's a problem because, as you know, Gini it's bordered between 0 and 1. So if you transform into the logarithm, I'm not sure how to interpret the interaction. What I thought you were talking about another thing at the beginning of your question, which is, you know, that some paper include a square term of the GDP, because the idea is that you have diminishing marginal returns. So you should check for the square of GDP because it's not linear. Actually, we did a test to check if there is the need to include a square term, and it suggests that there is not. It doesn't add much. But anyway, we estimate it with the square term, and it's the same, doesn't change much the result. We didn't try the logarithm, which is something, I mean, I can try, of course, it would be very easy in terms of estimation. The thing is, I should think more about how to interpret it, because I'm not sure that it works if you transform it in log terms. But thank you, this is a good idea.
And in that regard, also you cite there the paper of Hoffman et al., right, from 2002. So it's always difficult to disentangle different macro global things or like cultural things, because there they were talking about was it a Catholic religion or was it the language? Hispanic language, that this cultural thing that affected the performance of the teams. So in that regard, is it possible that some cultures have higher inequality, and then it's driven by kind of cultural thing rather than by inequality per se?
Of course, I cannot say it's not possible. It's a very interesting hypothesis that actually, if I understand correctly, your point is that actually by including inequality, I am not capturing the effect of inequality. I'm capturing the effect of some culture that has a good effect on football, but not because of inequality, because of its own. Of course, I cannot say it's not possible, but I would need a mechanism which an explanatory mechanism which is better, because I think that regardless of the estimation, the story of the opportunity cost makes a lot of sense. I mean that you see a lot of young people in poor country that want to become a football player because it's their ticket out of the slums. It's not so common in richer country. So I think this inequality story has the merit that makes sense, which is not what I can tell about a lot of empirical estimation I did in the past. So at least it has a mechanism that from a theoretical point of view makes sense. Then, of course, I cannot exclude that there is, as you said, a different underlying mechanism highly related to inequality that has an effect on football, but I would need to have an idea which this mechanism is in order, to try to disentangle it via an instrumental variable or whatever.
No, but what I mean is there are studies, like for example, there are very positive and significant relationships between the corruption index and the percent of Protestants in the population with British legal origin and so on and so on. And there are very good explanations why this happens. I'm the last one who goes to religion issues here, but there are explanations. So in that regard, if there is a relationship between inequality measure and some of those things, probably there is a reasonable explanation for that.
Maybe I can look into it. Maybe I cannot say that it's not. I cannot exclude it. And I mean, my point is, no empirical analysis done in this way could exclude your objection. But in order to make it better, I would need a theoretical mechanism that explains why a certain religion produces better football players.
No. It's not the religion that
a certain culture. I mean, whatever.
Yeah. But okay, thank you.
No, because when you were talking about legal origins, where someone was talking about Acemoglu paper before, I mean, they have a very clear mechanism identifying whether or not you like it. There are a lot of criticism, of course, but they identify a precise mechanism. They say the settlers that were dying wanted to just get the most out of colonies, settlers that were settling there wanted to bring their own institution to make it better. Now, this is a story that theoretically works to explain why you have a different. Then, of course, may be wrong. I'm not saying that because, I mean, you explain me, no empirical analysis will ever prove a theory right or wrong. We just offer some support, but then the theory rules anyway. I would need a theoretical mechanism that suggests that there is a culture, a religion, whatever, a language that influence football success, and it's related to inequality. And I don't have one in mind, but I can look into it.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Any more questions and comments?
Yeah. One more thing I forgot. I actually had it here. You should, in these cross-country regressions, you might want to have a dummy because you're working since 1975 for dummy for socialist countries or communist countries or whatever you want to call them, because that actually, I think it matters in your story.
Yes,
because of how the institutions work actually.
I agree with you. The federation mostly gets that because, of course, those are very concentrated around a few places. But yes, I can add it. This is a part of the story. Yes.
Great, thanks, Jorge. I'll add a couple of things, Vincenzo. First one is very, very minor, but you mentioned that England's first match was 1898, but it was 1872. Not that it's
Yeah,
really
sorry.
going to make much
I
difference.
was just going in memory, sorry.
Figured you might be doing that. More substantively though, I might have missed the bit where you explained, because you're doing this at a monthly frequency rather than annual. Does that mean that you've got the inequality data and the GDP data also at monthly frequency?
No, it's a linear interpolation.
Oh,
So
okay.
you have yearly data and you get it linearly because, of course, as you suspect, these data are not available to this frequency and probably don't even make much sense at this frequency because, you know, it's not something. But to avoid losing the more timely information about the ELO, we linearly interpolated the variable on the right-hand side between years, and so that we can have we can use this kind of data.
Yeah, and I guess this is a check. Did you also estimate over the annual data to see if that made a difference to your results at all?
Yes, and it's the same.
No, I mean just kind of really interested. I think it's. I'm always very much a fan of as disaggregated as you can possibly get, but obviously, you know, as you've pointed out, one of the constraints in this kind of work is the fact that the macroeconomic data is usually quarterly at best and usually annual.
Yes, the thing is when we do it annually, the ELO, of course, you have one observation per year, and it can change very much because if you have the World Cup in that year, the ELO goes up and down after each match, and then you miss all this variability looking at it annually.
Well, I think ELO makes a lot of sense as a dependent variable, given that, because obviously if you looked at something else like win percentage or something, that would be much more variable month by month. But your ELO, you know, reflects the strength of the opposition in any given month, and given that, you know, it won't change that much, I think that's quite a nice functional setup.
Thank you.
Any more questions and comments before we wrap up?
And then, as you know, you don't want to use FIFA ranking because it doesn't make much sense for 20 years of their story, mostly.
Did they even exist in 75? I mean,
no, but
no.
This is not the problem. The problem is that when they did it the first time for about 10 years, they really don't make any sense. At some point, the USA are the best team in the world, according to FIFA ranking, which is strange. With all due respect to our American friends.
Absolutely. Okay, doke. Well, I guess there's no more questions. So thank you, Vincenzo. Really interesting presentation, really interesting discussion as well. I wish you all the best as you pursue your work further. We will return again next week. Next week we have Pete Groothuis, who is going to present on competitive recruiting imbalances between NCAA conferences. So between now and then, I wish you a fantastic weekend and a good productive week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thanks again, Vincenzo.